You're welcome along to the polling station. On today's show, we talk not only about Donald Trump, but the man who's been described as the French Trump. We also have news of the Northern Ireland Protocol. It doesn't get more exciting than that. And we have some breaking news as well, where an MP has actually been charged with harassment in Britain. And we'll talk about the possible connotations of that. It's going to be a packed show, William Kedjanyi.
It really is. Nothing stays still in politics, either at home or abroad. So now a lot to get through today.
Yeah, so there seems to be quite significant movement on the Northern Ireland Protocol, which we'll get to. But let's start on the home front, because this is quite significant. Claudia Webb, a 56-year-old, she's been found guilty of harassment following a trial at Westminster Magistrates Court. She's going to appeal this, but it could have connotations as well in terms of potential by-election.
Yeah, absolutely. So first things first, as we know, it is being appealed. That will take some time. There's set to be, I think, a sentence after that based on appeal. If there is to be a custodial sentence, even suspended, then a recall petition could be triggered. 10% of the voters in the Leicester East seat signing that petition would mean a by-election, and she will of course face calls to stand down anyway. Very important to note, she's not a Labour MP anymore. She's had the whip withdrawn since that charge. But if we were to get a by-election from this, which cannot be all that long a possibility, it looks competitive. It looks reasonably competitive given the voting patterns we've seen in that area over the last year or so.
Would it be a reasonable, would a by-election there be reasonable? I know by-elections are by-elections, but would it be a reasonable indicator of sort of the national currency, I suppose?
I think to a reasonable point. I think it would tell us plenty about where the Conservatives are. I mean, putting this hypothetically, assuming we have one, say she stands down for another reason, you'll need time for that by-election. It'll be some weeks anyway. We could have it in sort of midwinter, which is apparently when Tories are looking to have an election just after boundary review in a year or two's time. It'd be a pretty good marker of the midpoint now. Lots of things can change, but there was some really interesting polling again by Patrick English, friend of the show, in coordination with others at YouGov, showing that trust in the government is at a low despite their high poll ratings. It'd be really interesting just to see all those factors thrown into the mix, especially in the middle of winter. So definitely something worth keeping an eye on. And it would be a competitive betting heat. I have no doubt about that.
Okay, so the national support for the government might be rather low, but I do think this will help. So most checks on food products being shipped to and remaining in Northern Ireland from Great Britain will be scrapped under new proposals from the EU. That is according to Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney, who said it was a major effort to address the post-Brexit trade rules between GB and Northern Ireland. The proposals will be published later. This is actually big news.
Yeah, it is. It's very significant news. As you well know, there's been an awful lot of acrimony on the government side of the protocol. This being despite the fact that Lord Frost played an integral part in drafting
in its formation.
In its formation, and it was fully endorsed by him and the Prime Minister at the time. But there has been an about turn. There's been a volte-face on this. Dominic Cummings, of course, who else threw his hat into the ring by very much stating that it was not really the plan to go forward with the protocol, and that it was signed as a political tactic, which is something that many people on the Remain side have believed for quite a long time. To hear it admitted, I think, will shock some. It won't be a surprise to others. The significance of this now, the EU has made proposals in kind. The British government has the chance to review them. What it does with them will take us down one of two directions, namely triggering Article 16, possibly down the line, possibly a confrontation at the European Court of Justice, or I believe the arbitrators. All the meanwhile, if these exemptions are accepted, then there might be an easing of some of the issues that businesses in Northern Ireland have been facing. All this is very important, by the way, for the union, particularly given that Ireland did not vote to leave the EU.
Yeah, so this possibly entails down the line another market on potential unification, which to my mind is probably a little bit of a way off, but people may want to bet on it.
Good question. Very good question. I think if we got to the point where there was one, generally speaking, the status quo tends to be the bigger the move away, the more the status quo, I think, tends to have an inbuilt advantage. And it comes to this sort of thing. Brexit is the obvious example diverting from that, but I would argue the structural factors were very much different. So probably in a hypothetical yes/no, I'd probably be leaning towards no if they were betting he. But then again, lots can change, and lots has changed.
Yeah, 7 months on from the Northern Irish election, which is going to be a very fascinating race with Sinn Féin essentially miles ahead in the poll, both north and south at the moment, partly because of unionism's entirely disenfranchised nature. A man that people probably haven't heard of, and I'm not going to lie, I hadn't heard of him until very recently, is Eric Zemmour, who's a right-wing populist, and he's been a market springer in the old French election.
Yeah, indeed. So much of a springer that he's now 5-1 second favourite. That's short of Le Pen, who he is beating in some polls. Zemmour, I'll talk more about him in a minute, but if you want the sort of top line, imagine intellectual French Trump with huge use of media and very astute at framing. Now, he's very much a polemical figure. He has lots of very inflammatory, I would say far-right rhetoric on immigration and Islam.
Which will buy a lot of votes in France.
Yeah, it's absolutely confirmed that you can get a large amount of votes in France going down that route. Indeed, I mean, Marine Le Pen, as an example, who he's now beating. The Harris Interactive poll just last week showed that Zemmour would get to a runoff, which is quite remarkable in itself, considering how new a candidate he is. In terms of the aggregates, it's important to remember that he's at 13%, Le Pen is at 17%, Macron's at 24%, for anybody interested. But that's still a big entry, and it's interesting. We've got two figures very much clashing in that lane of French politics, which I don't think we've
presumably had. That means that's good news for everyone else.
It's good news for Macron, or it would be good news for Macron if there wasn't to be a runoff. The runoff puts the head-to-head. But then again, one could argue the runoff is good news for Macron because, generally speaking, he becomes a candidate that others coalesce their votes around. At least that was what happened when he faced Le Pen last time. That's going to be a very tricky election. That there's a lot of issues facing the Elysee. Energy prices are going to make life difficult for governments all across Europe. And generally speaking, they tend to take the brunt of it more than they do here, I think, the blame for such problems.
Let's talk actual Donald Trump. So according to you, the US betting market has him favourite for 2024. Now, I want to think that he was 10-1, give or take, at some stage after the most recent election, but he seems to have effective control of the Republican Party. And if Biden obviously has a shaky term, and there wasn't an awful lot in the most recent election, you can see this. I actually can see this happening. Talk to me.
I very much can as well. And I'll go further. I think that the 11-8 on him being the nominee, we have discussed this before. I think it's a matter of if he runs. And I think if he runs, I think it has to be taken. And I don't see what's stopping him from running. There hasn't been anything on legal front in quite a while.
He's been rallying away.
He has been rallying away. I think it's important to remember not that much time has passed since Biden was elected president. Not a huge amount of time. He's not halfway through his term yet, I don't think. So the grievance of those people who voted for Trump and believe the election was stolen, which is nearly uniform, is very much still there. The Republican Party has not shifted away from him at all. He has that party backing. He has the resources. I think if he was to run again, plenty would power his campaign, whether he's got the money for it or not. And looking just at a couple of polls recently, for Republican primary, Morning Consult for Politico, Trump is on, guess what his vote share is in a hypothetical primary?
40?
47%.
Wow.
Next best is Pence on 12. Next best is DeSantis on 12. Everybody else is 6 or below.
Cantor.
Yeah, basically 11 to 8 is picking it up off the street. If he runs, which I think he will, he's 4. He hasn't become a favorite with us just yet. He's 4-1 to be the president in 2024, to be elected president. I think that price would get short before the end of the year. I do, and I think we'll see it under some pressure. I think people will definitely get involved with price of falls for Trump to be president next time around. Interesting that depending on where you look, the generic ballot for the midterms is either very tight or very large in 2022. YouGov have the Democrats well clear, something like 8% clear. My thinking would be that they'll win in 2022. It'll mostly be Trump supporting candidates, and by then I think Trump will throw his hat to the ring. As for a fight again against Biden, which is still looking most likely, not impossible with other candidates, but I think most likely them in a rematch. I tell you what, I wouldn't be making Trump 4-1 for that.
Absolutely not. You know, and yeah, I mean, a lot can happen in the meantime, but I don't know. Am I right to be a little bit kind of despondent about the world when we're talking about this?
Well, personally, no. The prospect to me is entirely terrifying, but also I think very real. I think it's very, very likely he's the nominee again. I think it's likely he faces Biden, then it will be whether the incumbency of the presidency is an advantage, or whether it weighs him down and people say he hasn't achieved enough or whatever. Still plenty of time on that. Although the infrastructure bill being held in both houses is not matters for Democrats at the moment.
Apologies for the slight loss of sound there. What have we got next week for the polling station viewers?
So next week, we'll be tracking these market movers and whatever other polling we have on French election and the US, because I'm very keen to see the hypothetical matchups as they do from time to time, i.e. Harris versus Trump, for example, or Biden versus DeSantis. And elsewhere, I'm going to keep an eye on the domestic markets too, because I was saying last week how I just couldn't believe some of the value in the next Conservative leader in the next Prime Minister market. And I'm going to say it again. Liz Truss is 12-1 to be the next Prime Minister, and I just think that's massive. And I said this, I think it was last week or the week before last, reviewing the Conservative Party conference.
Yeah.
I just think 12-1 is very big about her being the next Prime Minister. She's also gone out to she's still 7th to be the next Tory party leader, but I think you'd be well off backing her for both. I think she'll go shorter at some point for sure. I know that being Foreign Secretary is a job which has many challenges, but they're structural and they're long term. And I don't think they tend to have the direct impact that the Chancellor's challenges do on a domestic stage. And she's just as popular, if not more, with the party faithful than Sunak. That can change, that can go up and down, but she's in a good place, I think. High status, but insulated from direct decisions that Johnson makes and direct decisions that Sunak makes. And you pick up that experience and people in the party consider you ready to run. So, yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on all this for next week. Plus, also, who knows what might happen? It's politics. It's the current year. In 2 days, you might be doing an emergency episode of these. That sounds good. So, lots more next week.
That was the polling station. So we got through France, the US, a bit of Northern Ireland, and the domestic front. And we'll be back next week, Johnny Ward and William Kedjanyi.